Liz, last night the president posted on social media, this is on another whole other story, he said, quote, "The pardons that Sleepy Joe Biden gave to the unselect committee of political thugs and many others are hereby declared void, vacant, and of no further force or effect because of the fact that they were done by AutoPen. In other words, Joe Biden did not sign them, but more importantly, he did not know anything about them," end quote. Now, obviously, the AutoPen, it's a device presidents of both parties have used to sign documents when they don't have the time or inclination to sign it by hand. It's not clear if President Biden did that or not. I understand you were not involved in those decisions, but can a president void his predecessor's pardons regardless of the circumstances? Does it work that way?
Anderson, yeah, to be clear, the Office of the Pardon Attorney where I worked had no role in the decision making around that pardon. And I think we could have a legitimate debate about whether the president should or should not have the power to issue preemptive pardons like that one. But what is established is that the president does, in fact, have that power. And once the president makes the decision to do that, it is unprecedented. There is no authority for a subsequent president to try to undo the pardon. I think that tweet is really just a distraction. It's really just one small example of the fact that the president is determined to demolish the rule of law, and he is prepared to steamroll anything or anyone that's standing in his way. I want to note that one of the most I think solidifying moments was when he appeared in the Department of Justice on Friday and gave a speech in the Great Hall in which he declared that he is the chief law enforcement officer in this country. That is unprecedented. That is the job of the Attorney General. And the Attorney General stood by his side. She introduced him and she essentially endorsed the idea that she's not going to be independent of the president. She does not have an agenda of her own. She's not going to stand up to him. She is there to facilitate the president's agenda. And I don't think anyone who saw either her remarks or his remarks could have any doubt that the president is the one who is setting the agenda for the Department of Justice. He is also at the same time kneecapping the defense bar, which plays a crucial role in pushing back against excesses of the Department of Justice by going after attorneys who have represented people who he does not like. So he's really going after the rule of law from multiple different directions. And it's a very scary, alarming situation for all Americans and should be to everyone, regardless of their politics.
Hey, Judge Gertner, I mean, if the president says the pardons are null and void and the Justice Department, the FBI work for him, what's to stop them from launching investigations into the January 6th committee members? I mean, would courts in some way step in on that?
Nothing to. Well, I mean, what one would have to do in this situation is what one is doing with respect to the deportation orders, the various executive orders, is they will have to be challenged in court. He would start an investigation. There would be a challenge to the investigation saying we were pardoned, and then you'd have to litigate the legitimacy of the pardon. But the scary thing about this, scary is not a strong enough word. He is simply testing the limits of our judicial system and testing the limits of our law. And while his minions are claiming that, this is the judge's fault and that they should be impeached, the fact of the matter is that what he is doing and trying to do is lawless from top to bottom. And it would be shocking if judges did not respond. In other words, it's his doing, not their doing, that is the problem.
Well, Ellie, let me just point out a possibility here, because Liz brought up this idea. I mean, if, say, he goes after January 6th committee members, they look to a law firm in Washington, D.C., they want to hire a good law firm to defend them against FBI investigations. The president is now going after law firms in Washington specifically to prevent them from taking cases of people who might be run afoul of the Trump administration. So he's going after big law firms in Washington to intimidate them to not take any of these cases.
This targeting of law firms is so corrosive on a couple levels. First of all, it threatens the very existence of these law firms, because the question is, if there's a huge client out there, a defense contractor that needs to get contracts with the federal government to survive, why are they going to hire one of these law firms on the blacklist? I should say, worked at Covington and Burling a long time ago, one of the law firms that's been singled out. But
right. Any corporation, why would they hire one of these law firms if the president is going to attack that corporation just because they use these lawyers?
If they're going to be shut out from contracts. But more to the point, it goes to the heart of the right to counsel. Covington's great sin here is they're representing Jack Smith. Whatever one may think of Jack Smith, and I don't think he did anything remotely criminal, he sure as heck is entitled to have counsel and to have counsel of his choosing. Criminal defendants are entitled to the counsel, and if they can afford it, counsel of their choosing. So not only is he posing a very serious threat to law firms, and by the way, people at law firms are rightly extremely alarmed about this, but he's really undermining the constitutional right to counsel that applies to everybody.
Well, also, Liz, I mean, it's going after these attorneys, not necessarily for anything they've done, but just for being on this law firm, removing security clearances, stopping them from entering a federal building so they can't even defend a client to meet with government prosecutors.
Yeah, it's very scary. I spent 10 years working as a federal public defender, and I can tell you that defense attorneys play an absolutely vital role in pushing back against some of the prosecutorial powers that the president is asserting. Without defense attorneys, the prosecutorial power is essentially unchecked. We've heard a lot about weaponization of the Department of Justice from this administration. The fact is that the instruments of the Department of Justice, they are very, very powerful tools, and the effect can be quite damaging if you're on the receiving end of a federal prosecution. But that is by design, and it is a feature of the system that we have all of these safeguards to ensure that those powers cannot be used unchecked. We have guardrails within the Department of Justice that are being ripped away right now by this administration. We have guardrails outside the department, like the right to counsel, that are being ripped away. And at the end of this, there is going to be nobody left standing who can safeguard against any of the unprecedented uses of the Department of Justice that this administration seems to be embracing.
Congressman, you are also a former constitutional law professor. Is there any precedent for a president rescinding a pardon?
No, there's no precedent for that, and one president does not have the power to pardon or to veto a pardon or to rescind a pardon or to modify a pardon in any way. I hadn't seen this exchange with you and the press secretary, but she said, you know, did President Biden sign every single one of those pardons? Actually, it was a general pardon for anyone who was a member of the January 6th committee, and you'll recall it wasn't that long ago that Donald Trump was running around talking about prosecuting our chair and Liz Cheney and so on. So there was just one signature for everybody on the committee. That's the same way that Donald Trump pardoned nearly 1,600 insurrectionists, including hundreds of violent cop assaulters who attacked the police on January the 6th with one signature for the whole group on that executive order.
I mean, what was your reaction to seeing this post overnight and just this argument? I mean, when I was talking to lawyers today ahead of the briefing about how this would even work, they were saying, well, you know, they'd have to prosecute someone who, or try to prosecute someone who got a pardon, and then that person would have to be able to argue that the pardon prevents that prosecution from going forward in court. I mean, which would mean that they would have to open an investigation into you or to Liz Cheney or to any of these other people who got the preemptive pardons.
Which they already did in the last 2 years in the House Administration Committee under this relentless investigation of Congressman Loudermilk that went absolutely nowhere. They did a public report on it, which was completely devoid of any facts or any contradiction of the statements that were made in the Select Committee bipartisan report that we issued after a year and a half of our investigations. And look, that's the bottom line, Caitlin. They haven't laid a glove on anything that is in the report of the bipartisan committee. We had more than 1,000 interviews with people. There's hundreds of pages in the report. There are hundreds and hundreds of footnotes there. Everything is scrupulously documented, and that's what's so frustrating to them, because they would like to tell some sort of counter narrative. For a while, they were riding the Antifa horse. Then it was really the FBI did it. Then it was, no, Donald Trump tried to stop the whole thing. And none of those things worked because none of them were true. There's no evidence for it. But if they want to continue going down this road, and they're talking about forming a subcommittee in our committee in Judiciary, great, because there's one person who knows more about it than anybody who hasn't testified, Donald Trump. Let's bring him in and subject him to all of the questioning that the Judiciary Committee members would like to ask. I think that would be a fruitful exercise because he's never answered any questions about it.